Have you ever had the feeling that the universe isn't just indifferent, but is actively working against you? You trip, you lose your keys, and then, as the last straw, your phone dies at the most inopportune moment. These aren't just minor setbacks. It's a phenomenon philosophers call the accumulated burden effect. We sense that when life has already bent us low, it slyly pushes yet another, heavier stone onto our back. It is this cruel symmetry that the great OMAR Khayyam addresses in his darkest poetry. He saw this pattern 1,000 years ago, observing fate as he observed the stars. His words seem to be a direct accusation against the very heavens, which possess their own sinister logic. Listen closely to this sharp Rubaiyat that directly speaks to our topic today. This proud horizon, an indifferent villain, has never yet uplifted hopes for any man. Where it finds a human bent low beneath a load, it immediately casts yet another burden on. This is more than just poetry. It's a profound, almost scientific observation about the trap of accumulated burden, which we will now analytically dissect. If you want to delve deeper into the world of OMAR Khayyam, I recommend this particular edition of the Rubaiyat, the Rubaiyat of OMAR Khayyam. It is a wonderful book for your collection or as a gift. The link for ordering is located below this video. We are accustomed to seeing Khayyam only as a hedonistic philosopher who drinks wine and muses on ephemerality. But let's not forget his main profession. He was one of the greatest mathematicians and astronomers of his time. Khayyam was a man who sought patterns in the chaos of the universe, deriving them into clear formulas. He developed a calendar that is still considered one of the most accurate in the world. His knowledge of celestial mechanics gave him a unique, almost clinical perspective on the fate of humanity. He was an analyst who didn't just feel injustice, but could calculate it with precision. He saw how the planets moved according to strict, indifferent laws, completely disregarding human tragedies. This dual nature, poet and scientist, allowed him to move away from blind faith. His philosophy is an attempt to find human logic in the mechanical indifference of the cosmos. He did not believe in an evil God, but he did believe in relentless statistics. As a mathematician, he knew that every movement has a consequence, and every action has a reaction. And here lies an unexpected idea. The burden is not a mystical punishment, it is often an accumulation of consequences. He understood that a small push, a bent back, makes you less resilient to the next blow. That is to say, his evil horizon is a metaphor for the inevitable, yet not malicious, statistical logic of cause and effect. His greatest fear was the domino effect. And now, the most unexpected idea stemming from his astronomical experience. If we can see this pattern, that already gives us an advantage, doesn't it? Knowing the trap allows us to bypass it, instead of simply waiting for the next blow. We cannot change the laws of gravity, but we can change our formula for reaction. It is precisely in this gap between fatalism and analysis that the key to overcoming this burden effect lies. Let's look at this through the lens of modern science, specifically chaos theory. Remember the butterfly effect? A small change in initial conditions can lead to huge, unpredictable consequences in the future. The burden Khayyam speaks of is that very primary bent condition. If you wake up with a persistent feeling of guilt, your emotional horizon is already shaky and unreliable. This is the first critical crack in your system of resilience. Psychology calls this the negativity bias, or the perfectionist trap. After the first blow, we actively search for new evidence that we are failures, ignoring any successes. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle, where our internal burden literally attracts new problems. You start seeing not indifference, but the personal hostility of the universe. It is not fate, it is your internal lens focusing only on the bad. A manager who was late for a meeting due to traffic, his first small mistake. Under pressure, he starts sleeping less, drinks more coffee, and his concentration drops. As a result, he makes a critical error in a report and then receives a reprimand. The burden of the traffic jam, external, turned into the burden of fatigue and error, internal, and this attracted punishment. This is how the horizon casts a new burden through our own physical and mental exhaustion. The philosopher Nassim Taleb speaks of anti-fragility, and this is the perfect counterpoint to Khayyam's Rubaiyat. The bent person, according to Khayyam, is fragile and breaks further under pressure. An anti-fragile system, conversely, when exposed to a small stress or burden, only grows stronger. Our task is to transform the initial burden from a cause of fragility into a catalyst for anti-fragility. This requires an entirely new perspective on the problem. The proud horizon is an incredibly powerful metaphor that depersonalizes the problem. The horizon is not evil. It is simply proud of its majesty and indifferent to our affairs. It does not pay attention to you because it has its own cosmic laws. This reminds us of our fundamental insignificance on the scale of the cosmos. Our pain does not affect the movement of the planets, and this feeling of our own triviality is the hardest to accept. What exactly is the burden? It is not only an external problem, such as illness or poverty, but also an internal load. Often it is our internal burden, unrepented guilt, chronic stress, or a feeling of personal inadequacy. This internal burden is the most dangerous because it is invisible but constant. It is what bends a person so that they cannot stand up before the next trial. This is the point of greatest vulnerability. Khayyam often uses the metaphor of the jug and the clay to explain human nature. The clay, which is the material for the jug, has its own internal hidden structure. When the jug is already bent, meaning it has an internal crack, any subsequent external pressure will shatter it completely. This shows that fate merely completes a process that we began with internal weakness or irrationality. External pressure is only a catalyst. In the modern world, this burden is often social and systemic, not just personal. Poverty, for example, is not merely a lack of money. It is also the burden of constant stress and limited opportunities. This social pressure exhausts cognitive resources, making people more prone to errors and, consequently, to new burdens. This confirms that Khayyam spoke of a systemic, not merely mystical effect. It is not a law of fate, but a law of fatigue. The key to breaking this cycle lies in the concept of control, so often discussed today. If we cannot control the proud horizon, we can control our own reaction to the initial burden. The goal is to prevent the first blow from turning us into a bent figure waiting for the next hit. This requires a conscious, deep pause between the event and our interpretation of the situation. Psychologically, this moment of pause is the instant when we shift the situation from fate mode to project mode. For example, instead of thinking, "I'm always unlucky," one should say, "I am tired, and now what should I do to recover?" Changing the internal dialogue from passive to active restores our internal resource. This is the only way to avoid the further accumulation of burdens. Khayyam, despite his fatalistic poetry, lived an incredibly active life as a scientist and reformer. His own life was a powerful refutation of his darkest Rubaiyat, which is a beautiful paradox. He knew that philosophy might be dark, but action must be bright and rational. Therefore, Khayyam's true legacy is not submission, but a profound, sobering analysis of the trap in order to evade it. In our time, this accumulated burden effect often manifests as burnout, which is our shared epidemic. Chronic stress is already a bent back, even without external catastrophes. Then, the slightest unpleasantness at work feels like the final nail in the coffin, rendering us completely non-functional. Therefore, the fight against the burden begins not with solving global problems, but with the discipline of self-care and rest. We need to implement soul minimalism, shedding unnecessary emotional obligations and external expectations. Every yes said against your own better judgment becomes that additional burden the poet spoke of. Learn to say no to those who try to impose their own foreign load on you. This is not selfishness. It is the engineering of your internal resilience, protecting you from collapse. So, how do you break the cycle when you are already bent and feel deep fatigue? Start with the smallest victory you can control, as Gladwell's theory of small steps teaches us. Tidy your desk, analyze your budget, get up 15 minutes earlier. This micro-success restores a sense of control, and it is the first step towards straightening your back. Khayyam, despite all his dark poetry, was an existential optimist in the purest sense. He argued, if the universe is indifferent, it means you are free to create your own meaning. Your burden is merely a shadow cast by your own figure in the light. This realization removes guilt and shifts the focus to your decision. Let's recall the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, emphasizing the cracks. Your burdens and bent state are not flaws. They are your history, which should be embraced. It is from these very cracks that your unique light and new strength now emerge. This acceptance is the strongest form of defense against new blows, because you no longer hide your wounds. Your choice is simple. Either allow this Rubaiyat to be your sentence, or transform it into an instruction manual for action. We cannot avoid the fact that the horizon will continue to present problems. But we can decide whether we will be a bent person or one who learns to flex but not break. Breaking the cycle begins the moment you choose to no longer be a victim of this statistic. May this analysis give you strength and clarity for your next steps. Remember, the burden is just a trap, and you have the intellect and the will to recognize it. Write in the comments, what specific burden have you decided to cast off today, replacing it with a controlled action? If you liked the video, share it and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to seek wisdom together in the Garden of Rubaiyat. See you in the next analysis, friends.